It could have been worse, Met fans. This was the original patch Steve Cohen approved. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Park Ridge Sports History. This is Will O'Toole inviting you for another edition. Kudos to Howard Fredericks, the producer, the guy who makes this look halfway decent. But I just want to wish everyone a great spring. Hope everyone had a great Easter, Passover, and that you're enjoying the warm weather like I am. I'm a little late this week getting to the show because of some complications at home. But actually, it allowed me, and even Howard passed some stuff on. As you obviously know, I'm a cartoonist, but unfortunately, one of the great cartooning minds in the history of Mad Magazine passed away this week. He was 102, I think, and his name was Al Jaffe. Now, I know many of you people read Mad Magazine and were just enamored like I was with the different styles of cartooning and the great satire and the fun comics that they had in the magazine. I actually, ready for this, I actually got interviewed for a job. Never got it with Mad Magazine, but it had to be one of the unique, if not the most unique interview I ever had, because it was literally in the offices of Mad Magazine on Madison Avenue. And when you walked in, the office was just as crazy as the magazine itself. And I had a great time. They did like my art. They just didn't have a spot for it or any kind of openings, but they brought me in after I actually called up. So I always like to give them a shout out that way. I did read the magazine. I wasn't in a aficionado like many of my friends were who bought it monthly. But every once in a while, I would pick it up because they had Mort Drucker, they had Spy vs. Spy, Sergio Aragonés. They had a number of great artists. But of course, Al Jaffe had the old, the Foldo part of the magazine where it was a cartoon, beautifully drawn, illustrated, and then obviously colorized or illustrated, maybe even watercolored. And then what you would do, and all Mad Magazine fans knew this, is that you folded the last page in threes, and it would make the punchline to the question that the cartoonist Al Jaffe had created in the regular one photo page. And of course, here's the unfortunate thing. The minute that you folded the magazine, if you were a collector anyway, it brought down the worth of the magazine. So you either said to yourself, I'm never going to know the punchline, I'm never going to know the gag, and keep the whole magazine as best I can in pristine mint condition, or I just can't. I got to see what Al Jaffe wrote and what the punchline was. So you're in that quandary. And of course, I didn't get a real picture of Al Jaffe. Just know this. He looked just like this cartoon. He would grow a beard later on in his career. He had a mustache. Died at 102. And from what I was just reading, ready for this, he was a cartoonist. He was an artist. He was a graphic artist. So this was a man of many passions and talents when it came to the art world. And during his tenure in World War II, he was working with the Army in terms of, let's say, military designs, illustrations, and drawings, to the point where he was doing, I believe, architectural layouts. And why this is important to me is that he actually did the floor plan for the Rusk Rehab. And anybody who knows, Rusk Rehab is part of, if not is, synonymous with NYU Langone Hospital. And of course, that's where my wife works. And I never knew this until I was boning up on Al Jaffe and his career. So I tell you, what I love about this show, Howard sent me the obituary on Al Jaffe, and I was, wow, this is great. Howard knows I love cartoons, obviously, and he knows I follow all this. So a real shout out. And here's things that I just learned. My wife doesn't know it yet. She's still working. I can't wait to tell her that because she will get a big laugh about it. She's been at NYU for over 30 years, and it is like a second home for us. I've been there for many, let's say, operations and doctor appointments, so I kind of know the lay of the land at NYU. So that was one passing. Unfortunate. I was obviously a fan of Mad Magazine, probably my favorite cartoonist. And I did look forward to, like I said, the Foldo. I love Mort Drucker. I wish I had the same capabilities of caricaturing uh, actors and actresses and other celebrities and politicians. He just had a true gift, and I was lucky enough to meet him. And he actually signed one of his cartoon books for me, so I always felt privileged about that. Very warm, very nice man, and of course, he passed away a few years ago as well. And anybody who follows Mad, I know they don't have the magazine. I know it wasn't issued monthly for a while. I think they even came out with an annual. So, with all things tech, even that great magazine, for which was directed at, let's face it, 12, 13, 14-year-old young men, it was a great magazine. And if you were a collector, you know this. When Mad used to have drawings, like I believe you can see it maybe in this, they had drawings by Sergio Aragonés in the Mad lettering. And if you find those magazines, they're actually worth more because they discontinued that operation, which was probably expensive, but to print and all the rest of it. But if you have some of those magazines, they're even worth more than other Mad magazines, simply because of those little drawings that were just the detail that I used. Those are the things that you love most and that you remember most as a kid who collected comic books and read them and read Mad magazine and all the rest of it. Now, I do have another guy that was from the 60s, kind of an interesting guy, one of the original Mets, Hobie Landrith. He was a catcher. Again, reading about him, didn't know this, was not a great player, obviously, but he was, he stuck around for 13 years. He actually went to Michigan State. And at the time, Cincinnati was signed him out of college. He hadn't graduated from the East Lansing campus, which kind of upset many of the coaches in the Big Ten, not just because Landrith, but many of the other great star players from baseball were bonus babies in the 50s and early 60s before the Major League Baseball instituted the draft. And Hobie was signed off campus and then toiled, is really the best way, but a good way of toiling. He spent 13 years in the major leagues, which is pretty impressive for a guy. And you know me on this show. The fact that anybody appeared in a major league game is just remarkable to me. They obviously have more. I've said this before. They have more talent in their clipped fingernails than I do in my entire body. But what I was really, really impressed about was that Hobie was able to last 13 years. His very first game was in 1950. And you see, this is what I mean about this show and why I so appreciate Howard and Park Ridge giving me this, is that when I was a kid, or I knew who Hobie Landrith was as I'm growing up. I knew he was an original Met, but I really thought he was a young Met, let's say 21, 22, that the Mets picked off a pile of other baseball refugees, and they signed him to their first, the expansion team in 1962. I didn't realize until I started doing the research that he was actually in the major leagues for 12 years before the Mets even grabbed him. So he was one of the old guys that the Mets signed up, which was probably one of their big mistakes, as we've talked about in previous shows. One of the reasons, I'll give you a perfect example. I remember, and this was part of the Jim Bouton book, 1969 Ball 4, was that he was always impressed that Kansas City started out very slowly while the Seattle Pilots kind of contended there for a while in the American League West, which was just new in 69. Anyway, as the season wore on, Bouton realized that really what the Pilots did was they took old, basically over the hill players, veterans, that could be useful maybe on a pennant contending team. But if you're building a new team, it's not the way to go. Kansas City, for the most part, grabbed young players early. And that is why they were able to make the World Series by 1980. I know the Mets beat them 62 to 69 because the Mets kind of got smart with their pitching staff of Koosman and Seaver, building a team around them. Plus, they made some excellent trades, getting a Tommy Agee coming to his prime, getting his boyhood friend Cleon Jones to man left field, getting Buddy Harrelson to play shortstop, getting a great defensive catcher in Jerry Grody from the Astros. All those are important. But the Mets actually in 1962, just take a look at the age of the team. They had an old Richie Ashburn, who was the MVP on that 62 team. They took old Brooklyn Dodgers, just to cater to, and took old New York Giants just to cater to the New York fans who felt abandoned when the Dodgers and the Giants left. So didn't realize that Hobie was really over the hill. Now, he lasted 13 years, never played more than 120 games, I think. I don't even think that many. But here's probably why he lasted as long as he did. He was a lefty hitting catcher. Interestingly enough, his first at bat, from what I see, is his very first at bat. He gets a base hit in that 1950 game, August 7th, 1950, playing for the Reds, and he gets it off a pretty good pitcher. I think, as I'm going through his statistics, courtesy of Baseball Reference, and that is a guy by the name, because I stuck him on the football card, so you're going to see Walt Potulsky and Gary Glick and all the rest of it. But Vern Bickford was the first pitcher who surrendered Hobie Landrith's first base hit. Bickford was a pretty good pitcher. He actually won 18 or 19 games. Well, let me just get this for you. He faced Vern Bickford of the Boston Braves, and of course I have a Milwaukee Braves uniform there. Bickford had an 11.7 WAR. He was 66 and 57 over his career with a 3.71 ERA. But here's the deal: he actually he does come up late, and I'm sure it's all because of World War II. But he led the league in innings pitched and complete games in really his best season, arguably his best season. And that was 1950, the year that Hobie Landrith makes his debut in the major leagues. He won 19 games for the Boston Braves. The Braves, and against 14 setbacks. The Braves were 83 and 71. They are registered with 2 ties that year. He was 19 and 14, 3.47 ERA, not bad. 39 games started, led the league, 311.2 innings pitched to lead the league. And then the following year, he was 11 and 9, had a lower ERA, 3.12, and then never was the same after those 4 brilliant years to start off. He won 11 at age 27, 1948, for the Boston Braves team that wins the pennant, and they lose to the Cleveland Indians. Then he wins in 49. He goes 16 and 11, 4.25 ERA. Okay. With Boston again, 19 and 14, and then his final season with Boston, he goes 11 and 9. Now that year, I just want to see if he did any pitching in the postseason. In that World Series, he went 0-1. He had a 2.7 ERA. He only pitched 3 innings, but he did suffer a loss in that Indian Braves series. Vern Bickford. Now, The last guy Landrith had a base hit off, yeah, I got to go to 1963. So the Mets get rid of him, and they probably are starting to go young. And I don't have a picture of it. But he got a base hit, I think. Oh, well, the last pitcher he faces, I'm going to do that first, is a fellow by the name, and we've mentioned him before because he always had this nickname in front of him for whatever reason. And it wasn't Al Downing. I just remember the announcers always calling him Little Al Downing. Now, I think he was 5'9", Trenton guy, good pitcher. Why the Yankees? They traded him for basically Danny Cater. He actually in 1968, after 3 or 4 years with the Yankees. I actually tried. He was on the 63 Yankee team. And with Boughton, I had a picture, a Topps baseball picture with both Boughton and Downing, but I couldn't get it off the web. But he did pitch for the Dodgers. He was on their 71 team. He won 20 games with the Dodgers. He was a really good pitcher. And to boot, he's a lefty. But Al Downing, let me just see if I can find him real quick here. I had him up there. And what I'm going to do is eliminate some of these names as I go down. Al Downing was lifetime. He pitched for the Yankees, pitched 1 year. Actually, he was with Oakland and Milwaukee in 1970. He got traded around there. But then he wound up and finished with the Dodgers. Now, funny thing is, he pitches for the 61 Yankees. I didn't have time to go into. I'm sure he wasn't in that 5-game win over the Cincinnati Reds, but he is on that pennant-winning team. So I always like to say he's getting a ring. In 62, he's with the Yankees. In 63, he's with the Yankees. And in 64, imagine your first 4 years. You're a New Jersey kid. You come up, you play for the Yankees, and you're in the World Series 4 straight years, or on a team that appears in the World Series 4 straight years. And then the bottom drops 65, 66, 67, 68, and 69. Nowhere. They trade you. Now, the reason why I mentioned Danny Cater, there was a couple other guys, Ozzie Chavera. I do remember, I have trouble pronouncing his name. I think he might have been a catcher or a utility player. I remember having his baseball card, or a buddy of mine having the baseball card, and his name was so long, it barely fit on the cardboard. But Al Downing went to the Dodgers, and in 70, and I'll tell you what, I think he's traded for, I want to say Andy. There was a guy that the Yankees, I'm going to see if I said it right. He is traded prior to, yes, I was thinking of this guy, Andy Costco. I always get him confused with somebody else. Outfielder, could hit about 15 home runs for the Brewers. He goes to the Dodgers and wins comeback player of the year and finished third in the Cy Young. He won 20-9 for the Dodgers in 71. They finished in second place. They lost by 1 game to the Giants. And then, of course, he would pitch for the 74 Dodgers. And it looked like, I'm not sure how many games he pitched for the 77 Dodgers. And, of course, I don't have my baseball reference handy. Let me just see if I can get my baseball reference real handy. His last game was July 13th, 77 for the Dodgers. So he probably got obviously some World Series money, some postseason money. Probably get a pennant ring. But imagine that. 74 he doesn't win. 77 he doesn't win with the Dodgers. 61 wins the World Series with the Yankees. 62 again with the Dodgers, with the Yankees. 63 they get beat, and 64 they get beat. So in his career, he was on 6 pennant-winning teams. And as I said, I didn't do a real big case study of Al Downing. He does, I believe, strike out Hobie Landrith in his last appearance. Now, just to make some fun things with Hobie, his last major league hit was off a really good pitcher. I always thought Earl Wilson pitching for the Red Sox, 1963. Now Wilson, and here's what angers me. Wilson wins 22 games for the Detroit Tigers in 1967. Finishes third in the Cy Young, I believe. Finished 12th in the MVP. Now he had a 27 WAR, which isn't bad, considering that I think he was like 113 and let's say like 122 and 113. But believe me, he was a better pitcher than that record. All right, won 22 games. That was his best season in the major leagues with the Detroit Tigers as they finished behind. Earl Wilson was one of those guys. He does play for the 68 Tigers, and he is on that team. And believe me, that Tiger team was not bad. They had some pretty good players, and we've talked about them. I mean, Kaline was, late in his career. I get all that. Let me just see something. Yeah, Earl Wilson was 33 years old. 1968 for the Tigers. He was 13-12, 2.85 ERA in the year of the pitcher. The year before, though, 67, he was 22-11. Yeah, I was right. He was 121 and 109. I said 122 and 113. But basically, though, he was a winning pitcher. All right. The Red Sox, 63-64, mediocre at best. Okay. His record belied that. He was 12-8 with the 62 Sox, 11-16, 11-12, 13-14. He won in 66. The Red Sox traded him. Can you imagine if they just hung on to him? And I think who they got was Dalton Jones for Earl Wilson. So they needed an infielder because I think Jones was on that 67 Red Sox Impossible Dream team. He goes to the Tigers and wins 13 out of 19 decisions. So that year he's 18-11, 621 winning percentage, 307. Follows it with a 22-11 record, and led the league in 67. And yet, ready for this? His WAR that year was only a 3. So again, I always hearken to this WAR. It kind of confuses me, to say the least, on how and what actually constitutes the formula for WAR, because it seems to change with a number of players and a number of years and with certain positions. Okay. All right. Now, so that is Hobie Landrith in a nutshell. His passing, he was, I want to say he's like 93 when he passed away. Pretty interesting. And of course, Al Jaffe was 102, I think, when Howard sent me the obituary. 102. Now, I know I don't do a lot of football during the off season, but of course, what's coming up is the NFL draft. So I thought I would have a little bit of fun here. And I just I got this from NBC Sports because I wanted to do a quick survey of the NFL draft, because let's face it, they do so much. I think they do more algebraic expressions. I think they break it down into more scientific formulas about who's going to be the number one draft pick in the NFL each year. There has been pretty much, you can almost take this to the bank. I think the first year was 36. So this is 2023. So you're talking about 64, 87, probably 88 years of quote unquote an NFL draft. Now, of course, I'm not even including the AFL draft. As I had made mention, and I'm still wanting to get back to that 66 Notre Dame game. I'm going to do a whole thing on that. But that 67 season remains the only time in the draft. There were 4 players chosen within the first 10 players. I made mention is from that Michigan State team of 1966. All right. Among them, of course, was Bubba Smith. And I was amazed that Smith was not in the Hall of Fame. Just because he was, I don't know. I just always thought when I was a kid, and of course, this is the romanticizing of the game. I just remember Bubba Smith just being just Herculean. just being taller and bigger than every other defensive lineman. Kind of like this guy right here, Too Tall Jones. Ed Too Tall Jones. They made a big deal of him coming out of Tennessee State because he was 6'8". But if you notice, Bubba Smith in 67, he was 6'7", like 285. Too Tall Jones, who is the number one pick of the 74 Cowboys. And it was a great pick. All right. Would go on to help anchor the what I like to call them, Doomsday Defense Part 2 with Randy White, Harvey Martin, Too Tall Jones. You had some remnants from the original Doomsday Defense with Leroy Jordan. Okay. Charlie Waters was on that team. I guess I remember and liked those teams so much, probably because of the nicknames we used to give to the defenses. That's another show I'm going to do, and that is the great nicknames we had growing up of baseball players, basketball players, and even teams. I know you have the Legion of Boom. And that's the last defense that I can really recollect in the NFL that actually had a nickname. But when we were growing up, we had the Fearsome Foursome, the Purple People Eaters, the no-name defense, the Over the Hill Gang, and of course the Doomsday defense of Tom Landry and the Cowboys. Well, Ed Too Tall Jones was a 74 number one pick, and he is in that realm of what I like to call the non-Power 5 schools who have had draft picks. And I was going through this. First of all, just a quick summation of that number one draft pick. First of all, I believe, let's just say it's 88 drafts. Let's just say it's 80 drafts. There have only been 14 Hall of Famers picked as a number one draft pick. And of that, here's what I'm considering non-Power 5. Oh, here's another one. Chuck Bednarik remains Hall of Fame player, one of the last of the two-way players. That's how I remember him most. Of course, everyone who's a New York Giant fan remember him when he really knocked unconscious Frank Gifford in wasn't the championship game, but it was, I believe, might have been a playoff game, but he knocked Gifford down. And I just remember seeing the pictures. It's iconic of Bednarik. And it really was taken out of context. He was not in any way, shape, or form celebrating that Gifford was out. But it was a big hit. Gifford goes down. The Eagles of 1960 win the championship, beating the Packers. I think it's their only loss, as I've said before, in their run during the Lombardi years in a championship game. And Lombardi, I think he blames himself for that loss because he either switched the play or wanted to do a different play in, let's say, 4th and 1, and it was unsuccessful, and they lose the game to the Eagles 17-14. But in that game, Bednarik goes back and forth. Well, Bednarik not only is a Hall of Famer, not only is an All-Pro, very smart man, went to the UPenn, Pennsylvania University, an Ivy League school. He remains the first and only Ivy League player to be drafted number one in the NFL draft. Now, there was a little bit of doing there, like Jay Berwanger of University of Chicago, Heisman Trophy winner in 1936, being selected by Chicago. I even think then they had some territorial rights because I remember the USFL doing that, employing it. And I do believe that even might have been the AFL that might have done that the first couple of drafts. And I think the NFL kind of had, maybe it was an unwritten kind of rule. Hey, guys, if this guy's a great player in our region, leave him for us. It'll help sell the league and all the rest of it. Well, I think Bednarik was that. Nevertheless, has a Hall of Fame career with the Eagles, but he still remains to this day the only Ivy League player selected number one in the draft. Then I had a couple other guys. Of course, you know him, Terry Bradshaw. I wouldn't consider Louisiana Tech a Power 5, but he is selected in 1970 1970. Pardon me, because in 69 they picked Mean Joe Green, but he was not a number one pick. Bradshaw was, and of course, everyone even then was calling him dumb. Well, he was dumb enough to win 4 Super Bowls for those Steeler teams. He was tough as nails. I just like this picture because you know who he kind of reminds me of looking at this? Doesn't he look like Robert Shaw, a young Robert Shaw in the James Bond From Russia with Love? I'm just looking at it from behind and I'm saying, I've seen this face before. He looks just like Robert Shaw in From Russia with Love, one of my favorite Bond movies. So here we go again on a tangent. But he came out of Louisiana Tech. I remember seeing him gracing the cover of SI. I know that his first year, probably first 2 years in the NFL, was, to put it nicely, a learning experience for Terry, Chuck Noll, and the Steelers. I knew he threw a ton of interceptions, took probably too many sacks and all the rest of it. But in that game of game, that 72 season, I actually think one of the benefits of that 72 game, not only with the immaculate reception by Franco, making him a national name, even though they lose to the Dolphins, I think probably, and I know this sounds cliched, probably the Steelers learned how to win after that game. Now, they wouldn't get to the Super Bowl until 74, but I think they came off that field. And remember, in that 72 season, they actually hosted the undefeated Dolphins the following week. And it was almost a similar situation. Bradshaw had the ball late. I think they're only down by less than a touchdown. And I think he throws an interception. I think it was to Bob Matheson, who picked off Bradshaw, and that ended the miracle run of the Steelers. But it doesn't, because after the Dolphins make it official and go undefeated and then win the following year, it's now the Steelers' turn to win in 74 and 75, and then again in 76 and 77, or 77 and 78. And I really do believe that game, that immaculate reception, probably showed the Steelers, hey, guys, we can win. If you take a look at the Steelers from before Noll and after Noll, they have more winning season after Noll. What they did, that franchise, really, that just completely turned that franchise around from lovable losers like the St. Louis Browns. It would be almost like the St. Louis Browns moving to Baltimore. And then within a couple of years with Baltimore, and to be perfectly frank, it actually does happen with Baltimore as I'm saying this, but it took them a little bit longer, let's just say. With Noll, he comes up in 69. They win one game, and then they are the team of the decade. With the Browns, of course, they move in 55, or the first season in Baltimore. It takes them a while, 11 years. But then, as the Orioles, nobody even remembers the St. Louis Browns franchise being the Baltimore Oriole franchise. Okay, so as I'm going, here's Bradshaw. If I had time, I'd read the blurb behind. I just love this. This was typical Topps. You know, maybe moms weren't too happy with you collecting football cards or baseball cards, but there was reading, there was art, there was photography. Maybe you weren't growing up to be Ansel Adams, or you're trying to be more. I told you, I am sure that there are many artists for Topps that, use it as a springboard to other careers. Although I've never done, I'm going to do that. I'm going to find out more about the Topps artists, see if the in-house artists that they used later on become, let's say, cartoon strip artists or political editorial cartoonists, or go into commercial advertising, that sort of stuff. That would be interesting. That is going to take a little bit of time. Okay, now here's the other thing. Most of the guys drafted, of course, were quarterbacks. Here's an interesting thing, and this is why I say Power 5 and all the rest of it. Only twice has the NFL pick, the number one pick, been back-to-back from the same school. Here's what I mean. 68 and 69, I believe USC, and of course I was doing a quick one, so when I go off the air, I'll probably take another look at this. But when I was doing my quick little survey, I only noticed that USC and Oklahoma are the only schools to have back-to-back number one picks in consecutive years. Give you the perfect. I'll solve this for you. Ron Yary, an offensive lineman, Hall of Famer, goes to Minnesota. He's drafted in the '68 draft by USC. Now, I got to tell you this. I think the NFL draft was held in February and then was moved to April. So right out of college, many of these players were drafted, and they didn't have all these combines like they have to now. And then in '69, OJ is selected. Interesting thing, OJ Heisman Trophy, OJ Hall of Famer, OJ number one pick. And also OJ coming off or played for a number one team in the colleges. And then in 2018, 2019, two quarterbacks back to back. This is amazing for Oklahoma. Both last names ending in M. So you have Kyle Murray in 2019 being selected by the Cardinals, and Baker Mayfield for Oklahoma. They were back to back. A lot of other Oklahoma players selected, a lot of Big Ten players selected, a lot of Southeast. Man, Georgia seemed to just pop up like crazy, but not back to back. And it's kind of interesting. And you know why I'm going to say it's interesting? Because Alabama did not have back-to-back picks during the Saban years. I just find that fascinating, all right? Because they have so much talent right now in the NFL. You would think that they would have had back-to-back. All right, now, why do I have Gary Glick up here? Well, Gary Glick I have because he remains to the only defensive back chosen number one in the draft, and that was 1956. Interestingly enough, when I was doing this, he was selected as a defensive back, even though he played quarterback, he played safety, he played linebacker, and he also kicked, and he did that in the NFL as well. But he was selected out of Colorado College, and they are now Colorado State. He was selected by the Rams, lasted a couple of years, actually more than that. Let me just see. 56. Here's the fun part I had with him. He goes on and becomes a coach in the Continental Football League. Actually, ready for this? You talk about alliteration with the G's. His full name is Gary Galen Glick. He grew up in Grant, Nebraska, and he played for Colorado State. He played 71 games. And he was originally drafted by Pittsburgh. Originally drafted by Pittsburgh and played 5 years. Pittsburgh does select him. He plays a little bit of line, defensive halfback, safety with the Chargers. So his career lasted 6 years. He went from 56 to 63. He actually played for two different teams, Pittsburgh and Washington in 1959. He actually for Pittsburgh, he did kick field goals. He actually made 9 field goals in 25 attempts, 36%. So that's Gary Glick. Now, another player as I'm winding this down, and that is Tommy Mason. And here was the guys, all right? Let me just do this because I'm sure most guys know this. Next to Ed Too Tall Jones. I'm sure my fantasy football guys know all this. But Eric Fisher in 2013 from the MAC Conference, Central Michigan, he's the last player from a non-Power 5 school team. So and you're talking already now 10 years ago. And of course, he went on to play for Kansas City, and he helps anchor that offensive line. And prior to that, 2002, David Carr, of course, from Fresno State. Name is in the news, of course, because he is a potential free agent, maybe signing somewhere. As of right now, I haven't seen anything, so I'm sure it's still up along with that. And then I just wanted to mention this. Ed Too Tall Jones comes out of Tennessee State. And John Matuzak, the year before, and I remember this very well because the Houston Oilers selected him, and he came out of University of Tampa, not Tampa U. It's University of Tampa. Well, the funny thing is, he comes out, he really is, plays, he's 6'8" and 280, John Matuzak. He does make the cover of SI, and he came out of nowhere. Tampa, I'm pretty sure it's University of Tampa, regardless. They dropped their football program within a couple of years after he played. But he really makes a name for himself, not with the Oilers, but with the Oakland Raiders. And he has some good years with the Raiders. He was perfect for the Raiders. John Matuzak, he so typified the Oakland Raiders. But I was mad when Houston selected him simply because I didn't know who he was. And I do want to mention one other guy here. The last Notre Dame player selected in the draft, number 1, was a player I remember well. His name was Walt Patulski. And Patulski, I do believe, was from the Buffalo region, up New York State. I think he might have been from Rochester. He played like 5 years, retired. I think he became a lawyer, but I just remember him because he was about 6'3", about 245. He helped really, again, I use the word anchor, but it's really, he was one of the building blocks on those great Irish defenses in the 70s. And of course, in 71, they get revenge and beat Texas in the Cotton Bowl after losing to them the year before. And he is selected in the 72 draft, but people don't realize, unless you're a Notre Dame fan, that year Notre Dame didn't play in a bowl. But Patulski goes, and I just remembered him because it was just a great name. It just he just so symbolized those Notre Dame teams of the early 70s. So Walt Patulski, the last Irish Notre Dame football player selected number 1 in the NFL draft. Hey, this is Will O'Toole thanking you again. I know we did a lot of mishmash and went all over the place, but I hope you enjoyed it. Special shout out to Howard Frederick, always helping me with ideas and, of course, presenting this for your enjoyment. Thanks. See you next week.